The first time the Empire heard about Earth, no one took it seriously. It was just another small planet, blue and green tucked away at the edge of a quiet solar system. Their maps didn't even bother to name it properly, just a number, a coordinate. To them, humans were primitive creatures who still fought over borders and burned fuel instead of using clean energy. But there was one voice in the council that didn't laugh. A scout, old and quiet, stood before the Empire's high chamber. He had seen Earth with his own eyes. He had watched their cities glow at night like living veins of light, and he had felt something strange. A kind of energy that didn't come from their machines but from the people themselves. He tried to warn them. "They are not what they seem," he said softly. "They fight each other, yes, but if an outsider threatens them, they unite. And when they unite, they are unstoppable." The chamber erupted in laughter. One general leaned back in his chair and said, "A species that can barely reach its own moon will never threaten the Empire." But the old scout didn't smile. He only looked down and whispered the same line over and over. "If war begins, we must escape, not conquer." The words were recorded in the council archives, ignored and forgotten. Months later, the Imperial fleet gathered in orbit around the planet. Their ships were enormous, floating fortresses made of silver metal and burning light. From a distance, they looked like a swarm of stars moving in formation. The mission was simple: enter the system, demand surrender, and take control of the planet's resources. When the fleet arrived near Earth, the command ship sent out a message in hundreds of languages. It echoed across satellites, radio stations, and screens all over the world. "This world is now under the protection and authority of the Galactic Empire," the message said. "Submit peacefully and you will be spared. Resist and you will be destroyed." The aliens waited for an answer. They expected fear, chaos, panic, begging, but instead there was silence. The humans didn't respond right away. They didn't surrender, didn't cry, didn't even speak. They just watched. For hours there was nothing but quiet static from Earth's networks. Then suddenly, lights on the planet began to flicker. Power grids, communication lines, satellites. From space, it looked as if the entire planet was waking up at once. On the command bridge, the alien officers exchanged puzzled looks. "Are they preparing to surrender?" one asked. The commander shook his head. "No," he said, his tone turning cold. "They're preparing for war." Within a day, the Empire launched its first strike. They chose a target that seemed large and symbolic, a city by the sea, crowded and bright. The first energy beams hit the ground with blinding flashes, cutting through buildings like glass. The aliens watched through their scanners, expecting the humans to scatter. But the humans didn't run. Even as smoke filled the air, rescue teams rushed into the streets. People were pulling each other from rubble, forming lines, helping strangers. It was chaos, but it wasn't surrender. A young alien officer frowned at the screen. "They're not hiding," he said quietly. "They're helping one another." The commander dismissed him. "It doesn't matter. Once they lose enough, they'll break," but they didn't break. That night, the Empire lost its first ship. No one knew how it happened. A small explosion ripped through one of the lower fleets orbiting the planet. The scanners showed a human missile, primitive, slow, impossible to reach space. Yet somehow it had hit the mark. It wasn't supposed to be possible. In the command room, the officers whispered to each other in disbelief. "They shouldn't be able to do that," one said. "Their weapons don't have that range." The commander didn't answer. He was staring at the tactical map, where small human signals were appearing one after another. Not many, just a few aircraft, a few submarines, a few ground-based launchers. But they were coordinated, perfectly timed, adaptation speed increasing, a technician reported. "In 24 hours, they've learned how to target our shield frequency." "Impossible," the commander muttered. But deep down, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: unease. On the surface, humans were fighting with everything they had. Governments that once argued every day now shared secrets and strategies. Enemies became allies overnight. Scientists who had been designing satellites were now decoding alien signals. They learned fast, too fast. Every fallen alien ship became a lesson. Every broken weapon was taken apart, studied, and improved. One captured fighter was rebuilt in less than a week. When it flew again, it had a human pilot inside, and it was faster. The Empire's observers couldn't understand it. Humans didn't just resist, they evolved in the middle of war. They weren't born for space combat, but they learned as if they had been waiting for it all along. Meanwhile, in the Empire's capital, news from the front was growing worse. The council that once mocked the old scout now sat in silence as reports arrived. Fleets destroyed, communication systems hacked, outposts captured. The scout, now frail and forgotten, was called back to speak. He entered the hall with slow steps, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told you," he said. "They will not stop. They fight like no species we've met because they fight for each other, not for power. You should have listened." But it was too late. The council still believed they could turn the tide. They sent more fleets, more machines, more soldiers. But every time they landed near Earth, fewer came back. The humans didn't have stronger weapons, but they had something more dangerous: a reason. In one of the final transmissions from the battlefield, a young alien pilot described what he saw before his ship went dark. He said the humans had no fear in their eyes. Their cities were burning, but their spirits were not. They stood under the sky, watching the Empire's ships, not with terror, but with defiance. "They don't act like victims," he said before the transmission cut off. "They act like predators." Those were his last words. Back in orbit, the commander paced across the bridge. Half his fleet was gone. The humans had managed to jam their sensors and were now using the Empire's own ships against them. He looked out the window at the planet below, glowing faintly through the clouds. This world should have been easy to take, he said to himself. Why are they so strong? The old scout's words echoed in his mind. If war begins, we must escape, not conquer. But it was too late to escape now. In the final moments of the first campaign, the Empire realized the truth. The humans didn't have the most advanced technology or the biggest army. They had something far more powerful, a stubborn, relentless will to survive. Even when everything was destroyed around them, they rebuilt. Even when they lost thousands, they still stood. They refused to believe in defeat. To the Empire, war was a matter of numbers and logic. To humans, it was personal. It was about protecting home, family, and the future, and that was the difference. When the surviving ships finally pulled back, the commander sent one last message to the council before cutting communication. His voice was heavy, tired, almost broken. "Do not send reinforcements," he said. "They are not what we thought. This is not a war we can win." The transmission ended, but his words spread through the Empire like a ghost. Some called it fear. Others called it truth. In every academy, every outpost, and every colony, people whispered the same warning the old scout once gave. If you ever meet the species called humans, don't fight them. Escape. That war became a story. One the Empire tried to erase but never could. Even years later, travelers and traders spoke of the blue planet at the edge of the stars. A world small in size but impossible to conquer. A world where fragile creatures fought back against the might of an empire, and won. And somewhere in the vast silence of space, the old scout's final words remained true. They bleed, yes. They fall, yes. But as long as even one stands, humanity never truly loses. The Empire believed it had seen the worst of the human resistance. They were wrong. After the first failed invasion attempt, the Imperial fleet withdrew for repairs. Many in the council thought it was a temporary setback, a small mistake that could be corrected with better strategy and stronger weapons. They didn't understand that something far greater had already begun. Humanity had awakened. On Earth, people were no longer living in fear. The first attacks had united them like never before. Nations that once competed now shared everything: technology, intelligence, even food. For the first time in history, there were no borders, no rival flags, just one identity: human. The skies were still scarred from the first strikes. Pieces of alien metal floated above the atmosphere, reminders of what had happened. But instead of feeling defeated, people saw them as trophies, proof that the impossible could be fought and won. Scientists worked around the clock to study those fragments. Engineers learned how to read the alien symbols. In underground bases hidden from orbiting ships, a new generation of machines was being built. They weren't beautiful, they weren't perfect, but they worked. And every working part meant one more step toward survival. In a small hangar deep beneath the ground, a mechanic looked at a half-repaired alien drone and whispered, "If they can build this, so can we." That sentence became a silent motto for millions. Far above the planet, the Empire was watching again. They sent new scouts faster and better equipped. This time they didn't come in peace. Their mission was to prepare for full conquest, to finish what had started. The commander of the new fleet looked down at Earth with a cold stare. He had studied every report from the last war and believed he understood what went wrong. He thought the problem wasn't the humans. It was the Empire's hesitation. "We gave them time," he said to his officers. "This time we strike fast and leave nothing standing." The order was simple: total control. But as they prepared to descend, the fleet noticed something strange. The planet below was silent. No open transmissions, no distress calls, no radar activity. It was as if the entire world had gone dark. The commander smiled. They've given up. He didn't know that beneath the clouds, Earth was far from silent. It was waiting. The first wave of ships entered the atmosphere with burning trails. They expected no resistance, just another easy victory. But the moment they crossed the upper layers of air, their sensors began to fail. Strange signals filled their systems, jamming their navigation and communication lines. One by one, the ships lost contact with each other. "What is happening?" shouted one pilot. "Interference," another replied. "But it's not natural." And then from the clouds below, something rose. Small objects, metallic and fast, moving in strange patterns. The aliens didn't recognize them at first. They weren't missiles. They weren't drones. They were human-made ships, a new kind of defense built from the very technology the Empire had left behind. They were not large or powerful, but they were precise. They struck at weak points, sensors, engines, power cores, with stunning accuracy. The commander watched as his fleet began to lose control. "Impossible," he said under his breath. "They shouldn't even have this capability." But humans didn't need perfection. They needed results, and they got them. On Earth, the war rooms were quiet but tense. Screens flickered with data, voices spoke calmly, and orders were passed with remarkable speed. Every human commander knew what was at stake. There was no time for pride or politics. They had learned from the First War that the Empire's greatest strength was its order, a system that obeyed logic and precision. So they fought differently this time. They became unpredictable. Instead of direct confrontation, they confused the enemy. They sent false signals, fake transmissions, and electronic illusions that made the Empire see enemies where there were none. Alien ships fired at empty skies while real attacks came from directions they never expected. Within hours, the battle spread across the planet's orbit. Flashes of light filled the heavens like storms. To those watching from the ground, it looked like the sky itself was at war. Yet amid the chaos, one thing became clear: humans were no longer defending, they were fighting back. In one of the orbiting command ships, an alien officer turned to his commander. "They are adapting faster than any species we've faced," he said quietly. The commander clenched his fists. "Then we adapt faster," but it was too late for that. Every time they changed strategy, the humans were already ahead of them. Every weakness they tried to hide, humans had already discovered. Every piece of technology they brought, humans were already copying. Some ships began to retreat, their captains realizing they were fighting something they didn't understand. Others continued, desperate to restore order. For every alien weapon fired, humanity found a countermeasure. They used the Earth's atmosphere to hide. They turned the planet's weather into cover. They used everything, clouds, terrain, and even the magnetic field, as part of their strategy. The Empire had never fought a species that turned nature itself into a weapon. By nightfall, large parts of the fleet had been scattered. The commander sent urgent messages back to the council, asking for reinforcements. But the responses were slow and uncertain. Even the Empire's leaders were beginning to doubt. The reports made no sense. Humans fighting on equal terms with a galactic power. It defied everything they knew. In the council hall, a voice spoke up, one of the few who remembered the old scout's warning. "Do you see now?" he said quietly. "They were never meant to be conquered." No one answered. Down on Earth, the people didn't rest. Every victory came with loss, but they refused to slow down. Factories turned into assembly lines for defense. Students became engineers. Farmers carried parts to repair machines. Even those who couldn't fight helped by keeping others alive. Everywhere you could feel it. The spirit that had once divided humanity was now its greatest strength. They weren't perfect, but they were united. And that unity was something no empire could copy. In the middle of a destroyed city, a group of survivors worked beside a broken alien craft. They weren't afraid anymore. They had seen the worst and they were still standing. One of them looked at the burning sky and said, "They thought we would bow. But we don't bow, we build." And that was exactly what they did. By the end of the second invasion, the Empire had lost more than half of its fleet. The commander, who had once spoken with arrogance, now stood in silence. He looked at the few remaining ships on his screen, damaged and drifting. He thought about sending one last order, a full retreat, but his pride stopped him. He didn't know what to tell the council. How do you explain that a small, unadvanced planet had turned your army into debris? How do you admit that those you called primitive had outsmarted a galactic empire? He finally sent a short message, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Earth cannot be conquered. Every time we strike them, they come back stronger. I recommend immediate withdrawal." The council received his words in silence. They couldn't accept that a species without warp drives or plasma cannons had forced them to retreat twice. But denial wouldn't change the truth. Back on Earth, the fires slowly dimmed. The skies were quiet again, but the world was forever changed. People walked through ruins not as victims, but as survivors. They had faced the greatest power in the galaxy and lived. No one celebrated loudly. There were no grand parades, no speeches. Just quiet rebuilding hand in hand, brick by brick. But deep inside every heart there was pride. The kind that didn't need words. They knew the war wasn't over yet. The Empire might return stronger and angrier. But they were ready. They had discovered something powerful. Not just in weapons, but in themselves. They now understood what it meant to be human, and somewhere far away, in the vast silence of space, the message spread once more. Whispered among travelers, echoed in secret corners of the galaxy. If you ever find the planet called Earth, do not attack it. Do not challenge it. Because the humans there, they never stop fighting. The war that began as an invasion had now turned into something the Empire never imagined. A struggle for survival. What was supposed to be a short and glorious victory had become a nightmare. Across the galaxy, the news spread quietly. The most powerful empire known to exist was losing to a single small world, a planet that wasn't even united a few years ago. Many didn't believe it at first. Some thought the reports were lies created to embarrass the empire. But the truth could no longer be hidden. The mighty fleets had failed, and humanity was still standing. On Earth, the air was thick with determination. Cities had scars. Oceans carried the wreckage of battle, but life continued. Children played near the ruins while engineers worked beside them, repairing communication lines. People had lost much, but they had gained something that could not be destroyed: unity. They had learned that they were stronger together than they had ever been apart. From space, the planet looked calm, blue and quiet. But inside the atmosphere, it was alive with movement. Factories glowed through the night, building machines and tools faster than ever before. Every piece of alien metal found after the battles was taken apart and studied. The humans were not just rebuilding. They were evolving. The strange technology that had once terrified them now became their teacher. Scientists learned how to power engines using alien cores. Pilots trained in simulators built from crashed enemy ships. Every day they understood more of the Empire's secrets, and with every lesson learned, they became more dangerous. Far away, in the Empire's main fleet headquarters, the mood was darker than it had ever been. The commanders sat in silence, staring at reports filled with numbers that didn't make sense. Losses that shouldn't have been possible, signals showing entire battalions gone. And one haunting line repeated again and again from every surviving officer: "They learned too fast." Some in the council still refused to believe it. "They are a primitive species," one shouted. "We have ruled the stars for centuries. You expect me to believe they can destroy our fleets?" But others had begun to understand. They remembered the old scout's words, once laughed at, now carved into fear. If war begins, we must escape, not conquer. The council voted to send another fleet. Larger, stronger, equipped with the newest technology. They believed that this time, their power would crush the humans completely. They didn't know that by doing so, they were only making the humans stronger. When the new fleet arrived near Earth, they came in silence. Thousands of ships, dark and massive, blocking the stars. Their engines hummed with quiet rage. The commander of the new armada looked down at the planet and said, "This ends now." But Earth was ready. The moment the first ship entered orbit, it was detected. Not by fancy scanners, but by human-made sensors powered with a mix of alien tech and human creativity. The data was sent instantly to every base, every defense point, every pilot. The world moved as one body. "Contact in orbit," said a calm voice through the network. There was no panic this time. Only focus. Then it began. The largest fleet in galactic history opened fire on one small planet. The sky turned white as thousands of energy beams rained down. But instead of chaos, something remarkable happened. The humans fought back in perfect coordination. They had created their own fleet, built partly from wrecked alien ships, partly from their own designs. It was smaller but faster and smarter. Every ship had a pilot who understood the enemy inside out. The Empire's ships relied on orders from a central command, but the humans had no central control. They didn't need one. Each pilot made their own decisions, trusting instinct and communication with others. They moved like one mind made of millions. The aliens couldn't predict them. Their movements were too random, too human. One small squad of human ships managed to slip through the enemy formation and strike the rear of the fleet. They used old tactics, misdirection, decoys, and even silence. While the Empire tried to calculate the next move, humans were already there, attacking from behind. The alien commander's face darkened. "How do they keep finding our weaknesses?" he shouted. But the truth was simple. Humans were not stronger, they were cleverer, they didn't follow rules. They created them. Down on Earth, people watched the battles in the night sky. Flashes of light painted the horizon. No one knew who was winning, but everyone believed the same thing. Humanity would not fall again. In underground shelters, families prayed not for victory, but for courage. Rescue teams stood ready, knowing the war above could reach them any moment. Yet even in fear, there was hope. They had seen what they could do together. They had seen the impossible become possible. And now, even if they lost the world, they knew the spirit of humanity would never die. As the fight dragged on, the Empire's ships began to fail one by one. They had the power, but not the will. They had the weapons, but not the unity. Every time a ship fell, the rest hesitated. Every hesitation gave the humans another chance. In space, the commander realized he was losing control. "Retreat," he ordered.
"Pull back."
But the humans didn't let them escape so easily. They had learned from the last war what mercy had cost them. Their attacks weren't cruel, and they were precise. They disabled the enemy ships, forcing them to drift helplessly. They wanted to end the war, not destroy everything in it. Back in the Empire's capital, the Council watched the disaster unfold. Transmission after transmission came through, reports of destruction, confusion, and human victories. For the first time in its long history, the Empire's silence was filled with fear. One leader stood up and asked, "What are they? How can a world like that defeat us?" No one answered, but an old voice from the back of the room finally spoke. The scout, now frail and tired. He said softly, "They are what we forgot to be." The room turned to him in confusion. He looked up at the stars on the screen and said, "They fight not for control, not for empire, but for each other. That is something no machine, no technology, no empire can defeat." The room stayed silent. Even the proud generals lowered their heads. Meanwhile, in orbit, the final human strike began. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simple, a series of coordinated attacks on the Empire's communication relays. When the last signal went dark, the Empire's fleet was blind. Ships crashed into each other, lost in confusion, and a silence filled the sky. The humans didn't cheer. They just watched, tired and quiet. The war wasn't truly over, but something deeper had changed. The Empire had finally understood what their enemy truly was. Not monsters, not savages, but survivors. Days later, the last alien ship retreated beyond Earth's orbit. The people on the ground looked up at the empty sky. There was no celebration, only relief. The humans began to rebuild once more, but now they carried new knowledge. They had seen their strength and their flaws. They had seen what unity could do, and they had earned something far greater than victory: respect. In the dark corners of the galaxy, whispers began to spread again. They spoke of a planet at the edge of the stars, small but unbreakable. A place where even the most powerful empire failed. a place that reminded the universe that courage did not come from power, it came from heart. The saying grew among travelers and traders. If you ever meet the humans, don't challenge them. Don't provoke them, because they will fight like the stars are theirs to protect. And from that day forward, no empire dared approach Earth again. They had learned the truth the hard way. You can conquer worlds. You can control galaxies, but you can never conquer the human spirit. The sky was finally quiet. After months of endless battle, the stars above Earth no longer burned with explosions. The enemy fleet had pulled back, leaving behind broken ships and a planet that refused to surrender. But peace didn't bring rest. For humans, it brought a question that changed everything. What now? The empire might have retreated, but no one believed it was over. Every leader, every scientist, every soldier knew the same thing. They would come back. So humanity began to prepare, not for defense this time, but for something new. They would not wait for another invasion. They would go beyond their world. The first decision was made in silence under a gray sky filled with smoke and rain. A small group of commanders, engineers, and scientists gathered in an underground chamber beneath what was once a great city. The walls were cracked, the floor uneven, but the people inside looked determined. One of them said, "We survived because we fought together. But if we stay here, they'll return. We must take the fight to them." It wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. They couldn't hide on one small planet while an entire empire waited above the stars. And so began Project Horizon. Humanity's first plan to build a fleet not just to defend, but to travel beyond Earth's orbit. It started with the wrecks. The ruined alien ships that had crashed into the oceans and deserts became humanity's greatest treasure. Teams of engineers and scientists worked day and night, salvaging whatever they could. Every bolt, every circuit, every strange piece of alien material was studied and copied. The Empire's technology had once seemed like magic. Now it became their teacher. It took years, and many lost their lives in accidents or failed experiments, but the dream never stopped. From broken alien engines came new propulsion systems. From damaged shields came energy fields strong enough to protect entire cities. And from alien communication devices came new ways for humans to connect across the planet. The first human-built space vessel capable of deep space travel was small, barely large enough to hold a crew of 50. But it was built entirely by human hands, guided by human courage. When the ship finally took off, people from every country watched it rise through the clouds. It wasn't just a machine. It was a message to the Empire, "We are coming," and a message to themselves, "We are no longer afraid." While the engineers worked, something else changed on Earth. The people. War had taken everything from them, yet it had also erased the lines that once divided them. Nations that once argued over borders now shared resources. Scientists shared discoveries freely. Even children grew up with a different dream, not to own the world, but to explore the stars. In the schools rebuilt after the war, students didn't learn only about history or science. They learned about what unity could do. They studied the First Defense War like it was a story of rebirth, how humans became one people under fire. No one called themselves by nationality anymore. They were simply Earthlings. But even with unity, fear still existed. The Empire's shadow loomed large in every mind. The old recordings of the alien attacks were reminders that peace was fragile, and out in the darkness far beyond the solar system, the Empire had not forgotten either. Their pride had been crushed. The High Council wanted revenge, but they were cautious. They had seen the humans fight, unpredictable, emotional, impossible to calculate. So instead of attacking again, they began to watch. They sent drones disguised as meteors, scanning the edge of the solar system. They wanted to understand what had changed on that blue planet, and what they saw terrified them even more. In just a few decades, humanity had advanced faster than any known species in galactic history. Their ships, once made of simple metals, now used energy cores almost as powerful as the Empire's own. Their weapons were smaller but precise, and their communication systems could reach across light years. The Empire realized something the humans didn't. They weren't just surviving. They were becoming a galactic force. But humans didn't care about empire or power. They only wanted safety, to make sure their children never saw war again. So when the first human fleet was completed, 10 ships, sleek and silver. They didn't call it a war fleet. They called it the Peace Guard. Its mission wasn't to conquer, but to travel, to find where the Empire's borders began, and make sure no danger ever reached Earth again. The launch of the Peace Guard became a moment the whole planet stopped to watch. Crowds filled the fields, the rooftops, even the ruined cities, looking up as the ships rose into the atmosphere. Old veterans of the First War saluted. Children waved flags painted with stars. The air trembled with hope, and as the ships disappeared beyond the sky, a voice echoed on every broadcast. This is not an end. This is the beginning of humanity's next journey. The Peace Guard's mission started near the moon, where the scars of battle still floated, the remains of alien debris and broken satellites. From there, they traveled further past Mars, then Jupiter, then into the cold reaches where sunlight was faint. Every step away from Earth was a test. Would their engines last? Would their courage hold? But they never turned back. Even when their systems glitched or their supplies ran low, they pressed on. Because deep down they knew, this wasn't just about exploration. It was about making sure no one ever made humanity feel small again. One night, as the fleet drifted silently beyond Pluto's orbit, one of the crew members noticed something strange, a faint signal, rhythmic and distant. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. At first they thought it was a leftover transmission from the old war, but when they tracked it, it was moving, fast and toward them. They had found an Empire probe. The discovery sent a wave of unease through the crew. They weren't ready for another battle. But instead of panic, there was calm determination. They followed the signal carefully, and soon, the dark shape of the probe came into view, smooth, metallic, and marked with the symbol of the Empire. The commander gave a quiet order. Capture it. Do not destroy it. It was risky, but the humans wanted answers, not revenge. After hours of work, they managed to pull the probe aboard and shut down its core. Inside, they found data, maps, records, and coordinates. It showed exactly where the Empire's new fleets were being rebuilt. The humans had proof. The Empire was preparing for another war. Back on Earth, when the data was transmitted home, there was silence in the Global Council. The leaders stared at the holographic maps showing dozens of Empire colonies scattered across the stars. It wasn't a surprise. But seeing it made one truth clear. They couldn't just wait anymore. This time, the humans would take the fight to the stars before the stars came for them. But even then, they didn't plan to destroy. They planned to warn, to show the Empire that humanity didn't want war. But they would not run from it either. Preparations began for the second phase of Project Horizon, the journey beyond. More ships were built. Volunteers from every part of Earth signed up, not for glory but for duty. They were called the Voyagers. Each of them knew they might never return. But they still smiled when they left because they knew what they were protecting, a home that had finally learned to be one. The journey would take them into unknown space, closer to the Empire's borders. No one knew what waited for them there, another army or perhaps a chance for peace. But one thing was sure. The humans would no longer hide behind fear. They had learned something the Empire had never understood, that true strength wasn't in weapons or ships. It was in the hearts of those who refused to give up. As the fleet prepared to jump into deep space, the world below held its breath again. People gathered near the launch sites just like before, watching the silver ships rise into the night. The stars shimmered, reflecting off the metal wings as they vanished one by one. And somewhere deep in the galaxy, far beyond the range of human eyes, the Empire began to stir once more, realizing too late that the warning they once ignored was now coming true. Because the humans were no longer the hunted, they were the storm that followed the silence, and this time their warning was clear. We did not seek war, but if you come again, we will make sure it ends with us. The humans were finally at the edge of the galaxy. For years, they had traveled farther than anyone had dared before, leaving behind the warmth and safety of Earth. The blue planet had become a distant memory, a symbol of everything they were fighting to protect. The crew of the Peace Guard, now a fleet of dozens of ships, felt both awe and fear. The stars stretched endlessly around them, cold and silent. No human had ever been this far from home. Every turn of their navigation lights, every distant sun, reminded them that they were alone in the vastness of space, except for the Empire that still waited. The first sign of the Empire appeared slowly, almost like a shadow creeping across the stars. It wasn't a fleet at first. It was a single ship, massive and dark, moving with a precision that spoke of centuries of practice. Sensors picked it up. The readings were unlike anything humans had encountered, faster than anything Earth had built, with shields that glimmered like liquid metal. The commander of the human fleet leaned forward, studying the approaching ship. "This is it," they said quietly. "This is what we've been preparing for." No one spoke after that. The silence in the command room was not fear. It was focus. The alien ship didn't communicate at first. It glided into the system with quiet dominance, scanning the human fleet like a predator assessing its prey. And then a message arrived, not through normal channels but through the same mysterious network humans had intercepted years before. "You were warned." "Why are you here?" The voice was cold, unyielding, and strangely familiar. It was the Empire, and they remembered the First War. The commander pressed a hand to the console. "We're not here to fight," they replied carefully. "We want peace, but we will defend ourselves." The silence that followed was long. Even through the vast emptiness of space, tension could be felt, as if the stars themselves were holding their breath. The Empire responded not with words, but with movement. A fleet appeared from behind the darkness, thousands of ships forming lines that seemed endless. The humans watched, awestruck, as the size of the fleet became clear. And yet there was no panic. Every pilot, every engineer, every crew member of the Peace Guard knew what they had learned from Earth. Fear would not win. Preparation, unity, and courage would. Signals flew between the ships. Plans were made in seconds, adjusted in seconds more. The humans were outnumbered, yes, but they were smarter now. They had studied the Empire, understood their tactics, and learned to anticipate them. The first contact was not violent. It was a test. The Empire sent a single scout ship toward the human fleet. The humans could have fired. They could have destroyed it in seconds. But they didn't. Instead, they allowed the ship to approach to see them fully. When the alien commander saw the humans, they saw something they hadn't expected. Ships built by humans. Crewed by humans, operating like a single organism, with speed, precision, and courage. The scout returned to the main fleet, reporting back. "They are not afraid. They are prepared. They are different." The words carried weight. For the first time, the Empire hesitated. Back on the human ships, life moved carefully but efficiently. They repaired damaged engines, tested shields, and studied the alien fleets as closely as possible without provoking them. Even small mistakes could be fatal in this empty expanse. Every decision was deliberate, and yet amid the tension there was awe. Many had never seen the galaxy this close. Nebulas glowed in colors that Earth's atmosphere had never allowed. Stars burned in brilliant whites and reds. Some crew members whispered quietly to themselves, remembering the home they had left behind. Every memory of Earth became a shield for their courage. After days of maneuvering, the Empire finally made its move. Not an attack, but a show of power. Thousands of ships shifted formation, engines burning with brilliant energy, shields flickering like waves of light. They wanted to remind the humans that they were still the rulers of this part of the galaxy. The humans responded not with aggression, but with confidence. They deployed their smaller fleet in perfect coordination, showing the Empire they were not weak, that they had learned, and that they would not flee. For hours, both sides moved in silent patterns, studying one another, testing one another. The Empire fired warning shots, not aimed to kill, but to intimidate. The humans dodged, not recklessly, but with careful calculation, using every advantage they had learned. And with every move, the aliens realized something that shook them to the core. The humans were not just survivors. They were becoming strategists, leaders, and warriors capable of challenging the Empire itself. In one daring maneuver, a small human squadron slipped past the front lines and approached the command ship of the Empire. They didn't fire. They didn't attack. Instead, they broadcast a message, clear, unafraid, across the Empire's communications channels. "We do not wish to fight. We seek only peace, but we will not retreat. Do not make us the hunters when we do not want to be, but we will fight if you force us." The Empire paused. The message echoed across millions of ships and thousands of minds. For the first time in centuries, an alien officer hesitated. Could a species so small, so unadvanced in technology, truly pose a threat to the Empire? The truth was terrifying, yes. The humans were small in number but enormous in spirit, determination, and ingenuity. On Earth, millions of people watched the transmissions live. For the first time, humans beyond the Peace Guard saw what their journey had accomplished. They weren't just voyagers exploring space. They were ambassadors, warriors, and symbols of everything humanity had learned in the First War. Old veterans wept quietly. Children stared in awe. Families held each other close, understanding that this was not only a fight for survival but a statement of identity. Earth itself had sent a message to the stars. Humans were not to be underestimated. Days turned into weeks as the standoff continued. Neither side fired directly. The Empire tried intimidation. The humans responded with calm strategy. And then came the breakthrough. The human fleet, small as it was, had learned to communicate across subspace faster than the Empire could monitor. They began to anticipate movements before the aliens made them. It was not magic. It was skill, calculation, and teamwork. The Empire's forces began to hesitate. Ships collided, formations faltered, and confusion spread. Humans did not exploit the confusion to destroy. They only demonstrated capability, precision, focus, and intelligence. The message was clear. They were ready to fight if necessary, but they did not wish to destroy. After a month of standoff, the Empire sent envoys, not warriors, but diplomats. They requested a meeting with the human commanders. The Peace Guard was wary but agreed. In the meeting chamber, the humans saw for the first time the faces of those who had once called them weak. The aliens were tall, gray-skinned with eyes that seemed to pierce into the soul. Their leader spoke, voice deep and commanding. "You have defied expectations. Your courage is remarkable. Why do you resist what could have been peace?" The human commander replied simply, "We survived your war. We learned from it. We want peace, but we will not bow because we cannot. We will protect Earth and our people no matter the cost. If you wish for war, we will fight, but if you seek understanding, we can talk." The chamber went silent. The aliens had never been met with such calm, such honesty, and such courage. It was a first. When the humans returned to their ships, they were exhausted but proud. They had crossed into enemy space, confronted the Empire, and survived. And more than that, they had made the first step toward a new kind of future, one where humanity was no longer just defending its home, but shaping its place among the stars. The Empire did not attack again immediately. They retreated slightly, unsure what to do. For the first time in history, a species they had considered weak and primitive had forced them to reconsider strategy, patience, and respect. From that day forward, the universe began to whisper. Earth was no longer just a planet. It was a force, and the humans had learned the most important lesson. Courage, unity, and intelligence could make the impossible possible, even against the greatest empire in the galaxy. The humans had survived the impossible. They had traveled beyond their home, confronted the Empire at its borders, and returned with proof that courage and unity could stand against even the greatest power in the galaxy. Back on Earth, the people waited. The blue planet had become quiet again, yet this quiet was different. It was no longer the fragile peace after war. It was the calm that comes after having faced the storm. A calm built on knowledge, strength, and determination. Every city was alive with rebuilding, yet the rebuilding had a new purpose. Factories now produced not only food and machines, but also spacecraft designed to explore, protect, and defend. Schools taught children about technology, strategy, and history, not as distant stories, but as lessons from survival and courage. People had seen what humanity could do when united, and they refused to forget it. The Peace Guard returned from the edge of the galaxy as heroes. They did not enter in triumph or fanfare. Instead, they entered quietly, silently docking their ships, their eyes reflecting the stars they had traveled through. Families waited for them at every port, children running forward with excitement and fear. The sailors and pilots, engineers and scientists embraced their loved ones. Some were shaken by the vastness of space, some by the realization of what they had seen, and some simply smiled, knowing they had done their duty. No one spoke of victory in the usual way. The humans had learned that victory was not in destruction, but in survival, knowledge, and courage. And that was enough. The Empire did not attack immediately after that. For the first time, they hesitated. Their fleets withdrew slightly, and reports of the human fleet's return spread throughout the empire. Whispers of fear traveled through the ranks. A species they had underestimated had proven its strength and intelligence. The High Council, once arrogant and certain, began to deliberate. They studied the humans, trying to understand what had made them capable of defying expectations. And slowly, they realized the truth. The humans were unpredictable, clever, and united in a way no empire had ever seen. For the first time in history, the empire did not see humans as weak. They saw them as something to respect, and something to fear. On Earth, humans did not celebrate the empire's hesitation. They knew it could change at any moment. The knowledge they had gained from the probe, the encounters, and the standoff at the border was invaluable. They shared it widely, teaching every nation, every community, and every new generation what had been learned. Humans began to establish permanent stations beyond the solar system, monitoring the empire and other parts of the galaxy. These stations were not meant to invade, but to observe and protect. They were proof that humanity was no longer confined to one small blue planet. Every station, every ship, every trained pilot was a reminder that the humans had grown beyond fear. The fleet that had once been a small group of explorers became the foundation for something new. It was no longer just the Peace Guard. It was the human vanguard, a symbol of preparedness, defense, and the potential for exploration. The ships were manned by volunteers from across Earth. Engineers, scientists, teachers, farmers, and even artists joined the fleet. Every human who boarded understood that they were not only protecting their world, but also representing all of humanity. No longer were humans just survivors. They were ambassadors, explorers, and protectors of a civilization that had learned to fight, adapt, and endure. The empire, despite its size and power, began to respect the humans' approach. They saw that Earthlings did not seek war for conquest or glory. They sought peace, safety, and the freedom to live without fear. The humans had fought with strategy, intelligence, and compassion, qualities the empire had not expected. The diplomats between the two civilizations began a cautious dialogue. It was tentative, careful, and wary, but it existed. For the first time, the humans were not seen as enemies to be crushed, but as equals to be understood. And in that understanding, something remarkable happened. The humans realized they had changed the galaxy not through weapons, but through unity, courage, and determination. Back on Earth, life continued. The scars of war were still visible, yet they became symbols of resilience rather than despair. Children played among the ruins of old buildings, learning not just history but the lessons of courage and survival. Adults worked to repair cities, strengthen technology, and prepare for the future. The people had learned that every decision, every act of courage, and every moment of unity mattered. The First War had taught them fear, the journey beyond Earth had taught them courage, and the standoff at the Empire's borders had taught them respect. For themselves, for others, and for the universe. The humans also began to look at the stars differently. They no longer saw them as cold, distant points of light. They saw them as opportunities, places where knowledge could be gained, peace could be offered, and understanding could grow. Exploration became a human mission, not only for survival but for curiosity, learning, and hope. Every ship sent into deep space carried not only equipment but also books, art, and messages from Earth, reminders of what it meant to be human. The humans had survived war, confronted an empire, and returned wiser and stronger. They had become the stewards of their own destiny, no longer just defenders but pioneers. And in the vast reaches of space, the empire learned an important lesson. Power alone did not guarantee victory. Strength alone could be countered by intelligence, courage, and unity. The humans had survived not because they were stronger, but because they were together. Whispers of Earth spread across the galaxy, stories of a small blue planet that had faced the impossible and survived. Legends of humans who fought not for glory but for their home, and who did not seek to conquer but to protect. The empire, for the first time, hesitated to expand carelessly. It had been warned, and now it respected the warning more than it had ever respected any force before. Back on Earth, as the sun rose over cities that had been rebuilt stronger than before, people paused to reflect. They had been given a chance to survive when all odds were against them. They had been tested and had not broken, and they knew the truth. Survival was not enough. Humanity's greatest strength was its spirit, its courage, and its ability to come together. The humans understood now that they were not just protecting Earth. They were protecting what it meant to be human. The war had changed them forever. It had taught them fear, courage, loss, unity, and hope. And from these lessons, humanity emerged not as a species defined by its struggles, but as a species defined by its choices. The final message from the humans to the Empire was simple and clear. It was sent across every communication channel, encoded in ways the aliens could not ignore. We do not seek your destruction. We do not wish for war, but we will not run and we will not bow. Respect humanity, and there will be peace. Ignore us, and you will learn that courage and unity are forces stronger than empires. And with that, Earth turned its eyes back to the stars, not with fear but with hope, because the humans had survived. They had learned, and now they were ready to become something greater than anyone had ever imagined. The first war had ended, but a new chapter for humanity was just beginning. One written in courage, unity, and the endless possibilities of the stars, and the universe finally began to take notice.